All right, so have you ever noticed how some people just sail through negotiations? Like they could convince you to do, well, almost anything.
Hmm.
It's wild. I know I've definitely been in those situations thinking, wait, how'd they pull that off?
Yeah.
But it turns out there's actually a strategy behind it. This time we're diving into Never Split the Difference to unpack how FBI hostage negotiation tactics, yep, you heard that right, can help us navigate all those tricky everyday situations.
You know, the cool thing about this book is it kind of throws out that whole idea of negotiation being this really formal, by-the-book thing.
Right.
It shows how those intense, high-stakes strategies actually apply to everything. We're talking salary talks, deciding on dinner, even just navigating life in general.
And it uses this example of negotiating with kids about bedtime, which I thought was so relatable
Hmm.
because it proves how negotiation really is woven into our everyday lives, even when we don't even realize it. Anytime people want different things, that's negotiation in action.
Yeah.
But okay, here's where it gets interesting. The book starts by saying we're all a little, shall we say, irrational.
Absolutely.
What's that all about?
Never split the difference. Really challenges that traditional view of negotiation as this purely logical game because it dives into how much our emotions and our biases actually influence the decisions we make, even when we think we're being completely reasonable.
Okay, so how do we deal with that, knowing everyone's bringing their own, let's call it unique perspective to the table?
Well, it all starts with actually listening. And I don't mean just hearing the words, right?
Right.
It's about truly tuning in to what the other person is saying. And this is key. What's going on beneath the surface? Like, what are their emotions, motivations, the whole picture?
Okay, that makes sense. But in practical terms, how do we become better active listeners? Any tips from the book?
So one of the simplest yet most effective techniques is mirroring. You know how when you order at a restaurant, the waiter will often repeat your order back to you?
Yeah. Ah, okay. It does make you feel heard, though, when someone does that.
Exactly. It instantly builds a connection. It proves you're not just waiting for your turn to talk, you're genuinely trying to get on their wavelength. And then that makes people more likely to relax, open up, and share things they might not have otherwise.
It's like you're subtly encouraging them to spill the beans. Okay, sneaky. I like it. What else?
Pay close attention to your voice. I mean, we instinctively react to tone, even without seeing someone's face.
Oh, absolutely. Like, imagine the difference between a break, good morning, and then one that's just flat and monotone. Totally different vibe.
Right, exactly. So in a negotiation, you generally want to aim for a positive, light tone, like you're just chatting with a friend. But sometimes a calmer, slower delivery, almost like a late-night DJ voice, can be very effective too, because it conveys authority without being aggressive, especially when you need to kind of recenter the conversation.
Okay, so active listening, mirroring, finding the right tone. It's all about understanding the other person's emotions. But how do we actually use those emotions in the negotiation itself?
That's where tactical empathy comes in. This isn't just about recognizing emotions, it's about strategically using them to steer the conversation.
Hmm.
The book calls it acoustic empathy, which is what you're hearing, but then also emotional empathy, what you feel like they're feeling, and using both.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more. One of my biggest frustrations is when I feel like I'm not being heard, like in a salary negotiation. You know, you come in, you list your accomplishments, you've been going above and beyond, and nothing. It's like so demoralizing.
I hear you. That feeling of being dismissed is exactly what tactical empathy tries to address. Imagine this. Instead of stewing in that disappointment, you say something like, it seems like there might be some budget constraints I'm not aware of.
Well, that's good. That's much better than saying, but I deserve a raise.
Right, because by acknowledging a possible difficulty they're facing, you're opening up a dialogue. It lets them explain their perspective, which could give you information you wouldn't have known otherwise. And there's a specific technique the book recommends here, labeling.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Break it down. What is labeling and how does it work?
So labeling is basically verbally acknowledging the other person's feelings. Not necessarily agreeing with them, but putting a name to what they're experiencing. So for example, if someone seems upset, instead of arguing, you could say, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated.
So you're basically holding up a mirror to their emotions, just like with mirroring their words.
Exactly, you got it. But instead of just reflecting their words, you're reflecting their emotional state. And honestly, that can be surprisingly effective.
Why, though? I mean, it seems so simple.
Well, because when you label someone's emotion accurately, it's kind of like you're diffusing a tense situation, right?
Okay, yeah.
They feel seen, they feel heard, and that tends to lower their defenses. It takes the heat out of the conversation and opens things up for something more productive.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've got labeling as a great tool to keep handy. But what about when we're the ones hearing a no in a negotiation? Isn't that when we're supposed to back down?
Well, that's where never split the difference really flips the script. It teaches us to actually embrace no as a starting point instead of a dead end.
Whoa, really? See, that just feels so counterintuitive, though. How can no ever be a good thing?
Because no is rarely a simple rejection. It's usually a request for more information, a way of setting boundaries, or even maybe masking some underlying fear or insecurity. And so when you can figure out the why behind the no, it gives you some leverage.
So it's about digging deeper, understanding their motivation. Practically speaking, how can we do that?
All right, let's go back to that salary negotiation example. So instead of just accepting a no when you ask for a raise, you could try asking something like, are you unhappy with my performance? Or are there other factors at play here that I'm not aware of?
Okay, I see what you're doing there. You're pushing them to clarify their position or maybe even accidentally reveal some information they didn't plan on sharing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
By encouraging a more detailed response, you're getting a clearer picture of what's really going on. Maybe it's not even about your performance, but it's a budget constraint or company policy or something you'd never know unless you asked.
Right, and then once you have that information, then you can actually start problem solving together. Which is so much better than just like going head and head. Okay, so we're not afraid to hear no, and we're even becoming comfortable saying it
For
ourselves.
sure. Because setting boundaries and saying no strategically can surprisingly help you reach a yes that actually works for both sides. It's about knowing what you're worth and what you're willing to accept.
This is blowing my mind. It's really changing how I see negotiation. Okay, so we've talked about active listening, tactical empathy, the power of no. But what about compromise? Isn't that the ultimate goal? Like finding that happy middle ground?
Well, that's what we hear all the time, right? But Never Split the Difference challenges that. The book actually argues that always aiming for compromise can actually lead to less than ideal outcomes for everyone involved. Instead, it highlights using two very powerful tools: time and fairness.
Ooh, okay. I'm intrigued. Let's start with time. How can we actually leverage time to our advantage in a negotiation?
Setting deadlines, even flexible ones, creates a sense of urgency, kind of plays into that fear of missing out that we all have.
Oh, totally. Like when you're shopping online and you see only two left in stock, suddenly I'm way more interested.
Exactly. Creating scarcity, even if it's just perceived scarcity, can be so motivating. And so, going back to your salary negotiation, instead of leaving things open-ended, you could say something like, I understand the budget constraints, but if a raise is impossible by date, I'll need to explore other opportunities that better align with my career goals.
Okay, see, that's good. It's assertive without being aggressive, right? You're laying it out there, what you need and by when, but it's not an ultimatum.
Exactly. And it brings in that concept of, you guessed it, leverage, which leads us nicely to our next point: fairness.
Okay, fairness. But that just seems like such a subjective concept. How do we even define fairness in a negotiation, let alone use it to our advantage?
It is subjective, and that's kind of what makes it so powerful. Because as humans, we have this deep-seated need to believe that things are fair. We're actually more likely to say yes to something if we feel it's fair, even if it means we get a little less than we originally wanted.
So then how do we actually tap into that fairness factor when we're in the middle of a negotiation?
One way is to just use the word fair strategically. So you could say something like, look, I'm not trying to pull a fast one here. I just want what's fair.
Oh, I see. So you're kind of shifting the mood from like adversarial to being on the same team.
Yeah, exactly. It appeals to their sense of like reason and empathy. It suggests that you're both working together to find a solution that benefits everyone.
This is making me rethink every negotiation I've ever been a part of. Okay, we've covered so much ground already: active listening, tactical empathy, the power of no, time, fairness. But Never Split the Difference has one more ace up its sleeve. It's this idea of black swans. What are those all about?
This is where things get even more interesting. So black swan events, these are like those unpredictable, game-changing pieces of information that can totally change who has the upper hand in a negotiation. They're these hidden gems that, if you know how to find them, can help you get a better deal.
So how do we become expert black swan spotters? What do we have to do to channel our inner Sherlock Holmes?
It's less about being a detective and more about being really present, really observant in the moment. It starts by asking the right questions. Open-ended questions that encourage them to share more than they maybe plan to. Then it's about really listening to what they say. Not just the words, but any hesitations, excitement, or even those underlying emotions, because they might reveal something deeper.
Like that scene in a movie when the detective notices this tiny little detail that everyone else missed, and bam, it cracks the whole case wide open.
Yeah, exactly. Black swans are often right there in plain sight. It's all about tuning into those subtle cues. A slight change in tone, a weird pause, even a comment that seems insignificant, at first, because it just might reveal a hidden motivation or a concern.
And once we spot one of these black swans, how do we use it to our advantage?
That's where leverage comes in. The book breaks leverage down into three main types: positive, negative, and normative.
Okay, well, let's break those down, starting with positive leverage. I'm assuming that's a good thing.
It is, yeah. Positive leverage is basically having something the other person wants. So it's about really understanding what they need, what they want, their motivations, and then finding ways to align your offer with those things.
So it's about creating that win-win where everyone feels good about the outcome.
You got it. Now, negative leverage, on the other hand, it's a little more, well, negative. It's about understanding what the other person might lose and using that as, well, leverage to encourage them to make a deal.
Okay, so that one's a bit more of a power play, but you'd have to use that one carefully, right? Don't want to ruin the relationship by being too pushy.
Oh, for sure. Negative leverage should always be used strategically and ethically. And it's actually often most effective when it's combined with labeling. So, for example, you could say, "You seem worried about potential loss, and I get that. Here's how my proposal can help reduce that risk."
So you're acknowledging their concern, but also positioning your offer as the solution.
Exactly. And that brings us to our third type of leverage,
Hmm.
normative leverage. This one's all about appealing to the other person's values and principles.
Okay, so finding that shared ground, that understanding of what's considered fair and right.
Yes, precisely. So, for instance, if you're dealing with someone who really values integrity, you might highlight how your proposal aligns with that value.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It's really amazing how much strategy goes into even the smallest negotiations.
That's the beauty of it. Negotiation isn't about manipulation. It's about communication, understanding, and finding solutions that work for everyone. And never split the difference really lays out the tools to do that.
It does. This deep dive has completely changed how I view negotiation. Who knew that FBI hostage negotiation tactics would be so relevant to our daily lives? Well, on that note, here's a challenge for everyone listening. Next time you're in any kind of negotiation, big or small, remember what we talked about today. Pay attention, listen closely, and don't be afraid to dig a little deeper to find those black swans. You might be surprised at what you uncover.